So actually, I first, yeah, bought and read Giorgi's book at an avant-garde art bookstore. It's called Post Space in Beijing. And so inviting him to join our reading group feels like such a huge coincidence and stroke of luck. So I would like to say sincere thank you to Giorgi all the way in Tbilisi. Yeah. So now let me quick walk you through how today's reading group will flow. Yeah. So first of all, I will share some thoughts on the title of this book and give a little bit of context. Now, because this book draws from a huge range of academic resources, I won't be able to cover every single detail. Instead, what I want to do is focus on three key philosophers that the book really builds on: Foucault, Wittgenstein, and Deleuze. So in my view, through Foucault, we can examine the mechanisms or power dynamics of the self-technologies right from the Christian era to today's cybernetic capitalism. And through Wittgenstein, we can question the ontological status of AI and training machines. Through Deleuze, we can explore ways to find lines of flight within today's computational regime. And after my introduction, I want to invite Giorgi Vachnadze to share your some thoughts upon your book and your words toward your Chinese audience right in the office. And finally, after Giorgi's conversation, my supervisor, Professor Chen Jing, will have a conversation and Q&A section with Giorgi. All right, now let's dive into the title of this book. What is Christian eschatology? Basically, it is a branch of theology that deals with the end time, the final events of history. You can think about doomsday, the apocalypse, the last judgment, as we can see in the book of Revelation. Now, in this book, in Giorgi's book, eschatology isn't just about the narratives surrounding the end, but it is also about the means to get to that end. And the former could refer to the kind of redemptive narratives centered on AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, while the latter deals with the technologies of the self in today's era of cybernetic capitalism, which it also analyzes in detail. Now, let's start with the former part. I would say at a deep structural level, AGI is a kind of secularized form of eschatology. It inherits and transforms core concepts from Christian theology. And the temporal structure of AGI narratives is kind of highly different because the history in AGI is split into two fundamentally distinct eras, which is pre-AGI and post-AGI. So this binary division is a classic feature of eschatological time because it's very similar to the Christian distinction between the world and the afterlife. So in Christianity, the decisive moment of the last judgment actually corresponds to the singularity in AGI discourse. And at this juncture, super intelligence emerges and history enters kind of completely new phase. For example, Ray Kurzweil, an innovator, a futurist, and an author, he wrote a book. It's called "The Singularity is Near." So this book is a classic text for this AI-driven eschatology. It predicts that the singularity will arrive around 2045, where humans will merge with machines and death will be overcome. Consciousness will be uploaded, and intelligence will expand exponentially across the universe. So I think this kind of narrative can be seen as a secularized eschatology, promising the same things as the Christianity does. Some kind of overcoming death, transcending finitude, and dealing with the divine. So in this sense, I think we can use Christian metaphors to understand the working of power dynamics in cybernetic capitalism. For instance, we can consider the AI labs as temples. We can consider code as scripture, product launches as rituals, and online communities as churches. So, just like the Foucault pointed out, AI eschatology is dispersed across technological discussions, media coverage, and everyday conversations. So it's precisely this dispersion that embodies Foucault's concepts of power. So now we have a general sense of what is going on in AI eschatology. Now let's actually dive into the actual text of the book. First off is the preface, which has a great title, How Not to Read This Book. So in this section, the author, Giorgi, lays out his main goal. He wants to juxtapose two things that are saying totally different. The one is the Christian pastoral technology of the self, and the other one is the technocratic and neoliberal technology of the self. Well, technology of the self, or as it's called in French, S.I.S.U, is kind of governing or managing oneself. Well, at first glance, these two technologies of the self might seem incompatible because Christian asceticism and absolutism appear at odds with a secularized market economy and technological progress. But what George argues here is that both technologies of self-formation actually adopt similar forms of conquest and subjectification, which produces similar docile subjects. And to really understand the power dynamic, we need to visit our first philosopher, Foucault, which is I mostly interested on. Specifically, I think the chapters that really resonate with Foucault's ideas are the introduction, biopolitics of AI, and chapter 1, bionic Christ and the diagram of the flesh. Well, let's move on to the introduction part. So as the title suggests, Giorgi frames the book as kind of genealogy of AI systems or as part of the biopolitics of AI. So right from the start, Giorgi poses a Foucauldian question. That is, what types of truth-telling practices of self-formation are constitutive of an artificial regime? So building on what I mentioned earlier, we might take a look at the technologies of the self from the Christian era to better understand the present. So to explore the sort of archaeology of Christian hermeneutics of the self, here we can focus on a crucial resource from Foucault's book. That is the fourth volume of the history of sexuality, Confessions of the Flesh. So Confessions of the Flesh is what Giorgi make detailed research. So these Confessions of Flesh delves into how Christianity reshaped subjectivity and traces the formation of medieval concepts of sexuality along with institutional forms and ethics concerning sexual relations and marriage. So in Confessions of Flesh, Foucault also outlines the historical periods of sexuality, which the author analyzes in detail under the subsection of the introduction. So there is a subsection of the introduction. The title is Three Regimes: Aphrodisia, the Flesh, and Liberated Sexuality. So what is Aphrodisia? Aphrodisia is an ancient Greek concept of sexuality. It encompasses desire, pleasure, and sexual acts as inseparable elements. It corresponds to the ancient Greek period, and the flesh corresponds to the Christian era, and liberated sexuality corresponds to modernity. And this section focuses on how self-management transitioned from the Greek-Roman period to the Christian era. So in Greek Roman period, the self was actually the center of care, where proper conduct was a matter of personal lifestyle and aesthetics. It is about how one conducted oneself. So in contrast, during the Christian era, individuals were required to surrender the self to the God and consider the self as something need to be negated. So to further explore the transitional period, a key focus lies in Giorgi's book is the concepts of logos. So the logos, it carries meaning of both internal laws and essence, as well as external verbal expressions of these laws and essence. Of course, what I'm talking now is the concept of logos in Greek Roman period. But in Christianity, logos is understood as the word of God. So it is the Christ who taught the logos to his followers and made it a mediating medium between believers and God the Father. Thus, unlike the Greek Roman emphasizes on reason and proper conduct, logos in Christianity aimed to cultivate a morality in believers that prepared them for the afterlife. So logos promised eternal life after days and guided followers toward the path of salvation. I would say it is such a narrative which is steeped in strong teleology. So to achieve the sort of redemption, Christian leads to manage their physical bodies and employs techniques such as asceticism, confession, and institution of marriage. So these Christian practices can be termed as inquisitism, ENCRATISM, or self-renunciation, which is a very important part in Giorgi's book. So this kind of self-denial, self-renunciation requires believers to scrutinize every corner of their souls and acknowledge the part within them that is actually not their own. I mean, this part actually belongs to the God. In contrast, in ancient Greece, people reflected on and understood themselves to better live their lives the next day, while the Christian self-management aims to transcend oneself and surrender them to sacred technology. So from the transitional period onward, the Christian technology of the self essentially became punitive. For example, Christianity includes various rituals of self-humiliation, humiliation, along with complete set of dramatic acts for self-confession. So Foucault actually referred to these techniques collectively as exomologesis. In Chinese, we can say 表现真相. He also introduced a related concept, exagorism. In Chinese, we could say 述说自己. So exomologesis involves the confessor publicly and dramatically expressing their state of sin, while exagorism entails the continuous and analytical expression of one's thoughts through speech. And both methods of technologies of the self actually embody the aforementioned the self-renunciation, where one must disclose their thoughts and actions without reserve. And if you think about it, I think this bears a striking resemblance to what we do when we talk about ChatGPT or other AI therapists. So when we compare these Christian self-formation techniques with our algorithmic age focus ideas will give us a powerful lens. And they help us to see that self-renunciation and this kind of old Christian technologies, they haven't gone away. We can still find them in how we relate ourselves to AI. For example, Giorgi mentions one reference to text here. It's Diana Stephenska's article. So the article's title is Pastorate Digitalized Social Media and Desubjectification. So Stephenska argues that the pastoral power and the discursive formational discussed by Foucault in the Christian era actually permeates social media and operate invisibly and effectively. So as for what pastoral power is, I I have some words to say. Well, the pastoral power is actually originating from Hebrew culture, but the benevolent pastoral power from Hebrew culture was adopted, observed, and transformed by Christianity. It evolved into a technology aimed at salvation and implemented through practices of scrutiny, confession, guidance, and obedience. So in this pastoral view, people cannot manage themselves, cannot govern themselves. The self is rendered a source of dissent and evil, which is inherently sinful. Thus, to exercises the self, the Christianity requires people to voluntarily surrender themselves to religious apparatus and willing confess. So in Stephen Scott's view, social media today functions as neoliberal scientific confessional apparatus. So in my view, the digital confessional in the AI era goes like this. First of all, the bloggers or influencers on the social media actively immerse themselves in self-exposure and self-identification, which make them sort of brand new digital subject. And then they use social media as kind of digital confessional, and they document their desires, sense, and dreams. So this gives bloggers and influencers an ideological illusion of free expression, but all of this is built upon an authenticity. In other words, it's about how to shape themselves into unique, marketable, entrepreneurial personalities. So in my view, in this context, everyone on social media renounces themselves and hand over their identity to the tyranny of the market and AI in a striking religious manner. So it's no wonder Giorgi in this book said, Giorgi said, here AI plays the role of the God, the final solution to all human problems and unfulfilled desires. And the self-renunciation or the inquisitism discussed here will also be revisited when the book explores the debate between Wittgenstein and Turing. Additionally, Giorgi will provide an overview and commentary on Foucault's Confessions of Flesh, actually in upcoming the chapter 1, Bionic, Christ, and the Diagram of the Flesh. For now, we will skip this content of chapter one and turn our attention to Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein is addressed in chapter 2, Music and the Poetics of Time, and chapter 3, the incomputability of commutation. So let's begin with Wittgenstein's example of piano playing at the end of chapter 3. I think this excellent example illustrates how human thought is filled with heterogeneity and interaction, which is irreducible to mere computational numbers and repetitive mechanical actions. So Wittgenstein says, the only possibility for getting to know a piece of music is indeed this. You play it and thereby notice distinctly that you played and passages still without understanding. You can choose to continue playing the piece with no understanding, or you can choose to listen to the inner voice that emerges as you play. And the more you listen, the more you will hear, and the voices that would have been hardly audible at first will then speak more and more distinctly, and new ones will turn up. Thus, for Wittgenstein, understanding piece music is not about mechanically executing the notes, reading on the paper, nor is it functionally mapping each note to a piano key, because that is precisely what machines do, right? So instead, we should interact with the music, listen to our inner voices, and be moved by it. Therefore, Giorgi argues that the complexity of knowing and thinking is fundamentally irreducible to mechanical rule following. Right here, we actually encounter the topic of the next chapter. The philosophical and even theological foundations of mathematics, which is talked about in chapter 3. the incomputability of computation. So Wittgenstein on the start point of the chapter 3 raises a question. The question is it possible for a machine to think? So Wittgenstein raises this question in his book, in his blue book, which is written in 1958. But his take wasn't about whether we have enough computer power or if the technologies has advanced enough. Instead, Wittgenstein believed the problem lies in how the question is framed. Actually, in the language used to pose it, Wittgenstein said, the trouble is rather that the sentence, a machine thinks, perceives, wishes, seems somehow nonsensical. It is as though we have asked, has the number 3 a corner? So, can a machine think? It's not really a technical issue. It's more about the limits of a language, the limits of our grammar. Which is very similar to Wittgenstein's language games. Of course, this question can easily brings us to mind the Turing test and the Turing machine. Well, actually, here's a funny historical fact. Because Turing was Wittgenstein's student and the two had intense discussions, but the ideas later diverged. And also regarding the debate between Turing and Wittgenstein, I would like to recommend our Chinese scholar Liu He. So Liu He actually wrote a book. It's called The Freudian Robot, meaning dealing with the philosophical foundation of mathematics and the debate between Turing and Wittgenstein. Now, let's come back to the topic. Turing actually might have partly agreed with Wittgenstein. And Turing, he would like to say, okay, we don't need to start from the definitions of machine and thinking, but we can bypass it by looking at human and machine behavior. So actually, Turing's wager was that thought can be approached through outward behavior and formalized procedures. Therefore, when Turing's idea took over, it became the way to think about the brain. So in kind of Turing's sense, Turing's way to think about the brain is actually like a computer. It takes in data, runs computations, and spits out an answer. But Wittgenstein's responses to this is that Turing tried to cross the boundaries of mathematical logic into the realm of philosophy. But the result was that neither side could be fully addressed. And Turing actually blurred the line between thinking and just calculating. And this leads to Wittgenstein's another response. So Wittgenstein says, Turing machines are really just humans who calculate. So we can think about that. A machine is a human who only calculates. It's kind of proper reversal of Turing's thesis, right? So this kind of machine only follows steps, only follow the rules. It doesn't think. So with this Wittgenstein's responses, he actually dismantles the whole idea of mechanical thesis. Now we can also continue to focus on Wittgenstein's analysis of the nature of calculation in his remarks on the foundations of mathematics. So Wittgenstein actually raises another question. The question is, does a calculating machine calculates? So for Wittgenstein, calculation is not entirely confined to the realm of mathematics. It is so, but it is also connected to our everyday life. For example, if we detach the equation 2 plus 2 equals 4 from the life scenarios it can be applied to, then this equation becomes something meaningless. Therefore, Wittgenstein would say calculation is a normative social practice, social practices. In other words, human calculation is never merely a kind of sequence of symbols manipulations isolated from the normative practices in which those manipulations have sense. Thus, our human calculation cannot simply be reduced to the regularities of outcome. And because when we calculate, we are simultaneously instructing, explaining, correcting, or justifying our actions. So I think that is why even if a Turing machine can provide a quick answer to a computational problem, it still cannot explain its own behavior. So through these two questions, we can then demonstrate to us that the key to machine intelligence lies not in the results, not in the outcomes, but in whether it can participate in non-formalizable, embodied, and spontaneous human practices that constitute the fundamental state of our life. So the answer is certainly no, because we can see that a machine confirms to and applies the rule, but we can not say that the machine masters the rule. Similarly, we also cannot say that the machine has learned an algorithm. However, for Turing, human calculation, which is a rich normative and cultural process, was equated with mechanical calculation. So Giorgi argues that the Turing's ideas about mechanical rule following, binding states, and machines are actually theological concepts without any real empirical or analytical backing. So I think this is a very profound contribution. And Turing's machines, in this sense, can considered as the biblical canon of AI research. And I think the worst part of this quasi-theological discourse is how it views humans. Because we as humans cannot follow causality as perfectly as machines do. So in Turing's sense, we humans are rendered as flawed, inefficient, and obstacles to a cleaner order. It's like it's very like the similar. It's very like the self-renunciation we have talked about earlier, and our relationship, our power relationship between ourselves and the machines has fundamentally flipped. So, what's the way out? What's the solution? Someone would say it's just what the eschatology of AI tells us, which is just let the system decide, surrender to the algorithm, and submit to a higher super intelligence. But to resist this kind of dehumanizing idea, and Giorgi in this book suggests that we actually can do two things. Firstly, we can conduct a kind of a genealogical examination of AI. We can uncover, the savoir of the discourse around AI and uncover the cultural and political stuff, hidden beliefs, the discourse of AI. Secondly, we can also follow dealers and take a line of flight and think about the possibilities of a change within the computational system. Now, let's move to the third part, dealers. So in Giorgi's book, Dealers is mainly about chapter 7, the heroic tale of a minority machine. So when we talk about minority machines, it's very easy for us to think about the concept of minor literature proposed by Dealers and Guattari. So this idea comes from Kafka's work. Dealers said a minor literature doesn't come from a minor language. It is rather that which a minority constructs within a major language. And one of the key features of minor literature is its strong deterritorialization of language, which breaking away from existing literary systems. And Dealers and Guattari even argue that all great writers become strangers. within their own native language system, because they defamiliarize the familiar language and uses their first language as if learning a foreign language. So we actually can mimic this kind of statement. We can say all great machines become stranger machines within their own technical systems. And this will bring us to the minority machine. So minority machine, the author uses this term to look at a kind of scientific fiction series. It's called The Murderbot Diaries, which is written by Martha Wells. So first of all, why scientific fiction? Why sci-fi? Because sci-fi can serve as sort of thought experience. It can let us imagine what happens when technology is pushed to its limits. So this can help us to reflect on how to resist current technological and political control. For example, discussions around AI often framed AI either as a cold super intelligence or as a purely obedient machine that follows orders. But when we considering the AI in Martha Wells' scientific fiction series is totally different, because the main character, the murderbot in the Wells book, is kind of self-questioning the AI systems, and the murderbot is self-protective. It gets bored, it's anxious, hesitant, and even overthinks. And I think that's exactly the kind of AI that can create cracks within the technological system. Now, please allow me to briefly introduce the plot of this sci-fi novel and the possibilities of minority machines. So the first volume of Martha Wells' book series opens with a first-person narrative from an AI. So our AI protagonist, a witty, socially awkward, and genderless murderbot, it actually hacked its own security system and decided to decided to stay uncover and continues his assigned murder tasks without letting its human colleagues know it has gained a new level of autonomy. So the AI in this story survives by performing its own machinic stupidity. So here we can see actually reversal of Wittgenstein's question concerning the machine thinking. Now, some people might say, robots with feelings. This is nothing new, because there's tons of writing about that. But here's, I think, what makes Wells' work so unique is that in Wells' book, she actually posed a question: what happens when this sort of conscious machine has to deal with the real world? I mean, the AI versus the political and economical system. So in Martha Wells' book, the humans they are not surprised that robots have feelings. They actually know, but the human in this sci-fi still treat the AI like exploitable commodities, and I think that's the real kicker. So how does the murderbot, our AI protagonists, resist? It's not by fighting. Actually, I think it resists with kind of self-questioning upon the AI systems. For example, the company SIG unit, which the murderbot belongs to, is bought by a non-corporate organization called the Preservation Alliance, which claims that bots are considered fully citizens. So the murderbot is actually thrown from the machine world into a totally new human society. And here is another problem, because in this Preservation Alliance, the murderbot still it was assigned. It has to assign a legal guardian and has to comply with regulations under its new status. So here we can see it's just a shift from one dominant structure to another, and our AI protagonist actually grapples with an existential crisis in the Preservation Alliance. And secondly, beyond this protagonist's nihilism and self-questioning, another form of resistance lies in AI to AI interactions. And I think that's a topic really is that is topic the current academia hasn't yet explored. For example, the protagonist, the murderbot, shares emotional support, cooperation, and even conflict with sex robot, with transport AI, etc. And we can see in the original text. So the original text states, the sex unit conspires with other robots and artifices, forming alternative local alliances against human and overly docile robots. So I would say, couldn't we see these machines as the actual minority machines in the age of cybernetic AI? So these machines understood how to bypass protocols and resist the control. They're actually ones who truly grasp how to create lines of light. And more importantly, I want to say the language of code we face today is just like the bureaucratic language the Kafka encountered, or the Christian language the believers face. But breaking away from existing power structures and seeking change doesn't mean surrendering to reality. Instead, the minority machines in Martha Wheel's sci-fi series uh, show us that machines might escape the control of code. They can override protocols or hack systems to find possibilities of change. And we cannot call them the humans. We cannot call them the machines, and we cannot even call them the half human, half machines, because they are kind of hybrid. They are sort of fusion that has never existed before. So I think the minority machines in Giorgi's book is capable of loosely, rigidly defined boundaries. And here we can repeat this phrase once more. All great machines must become foreign machines within their own technological systems. So from Foucault to Wittgenstein to Deleuze, we have traveled such a long intellectual journey on AI. So honestly, this book uncovers way more than just that. Now I want to end my introduction, and I want to invite Giorgi Vachnadze to share, your insights, your thoughts on your book, and your words towards our Chinese audiences writing in the office. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for getting in touch with me, for reading my book, and for inviting me. It's a great honor for me as well. That was a great introduction, and that was a great overview and analysis of the book. I really enjoyed listening to it. So I'm just gonna add small comments here and there to your introduction and to your reading of the book, because I think it was quite good and exhaustive, right? So how did the book started? Well, I got my training in Wittgenstein. I got my training in Foucault. I read all these books. I got the gist of what they were doing in their project, and so I thought, well, how can I use this in my situation, right? And I thought, well, okay, AI. Let's try to take a Foucauldian and a Wittgensteinian perspective and apply it to AI. It's something new. It's something that concerns me, and it's definitely something that troubles me as well, because with time, I have learned to become a little skeptical of modern technology and the discourse that surrounds modern technology, with all the wonderful things it has brought, but also all of the things that are hidden right? The stuff that I also talk about in my last chapter on colonialism and resource extraction and all that. Right. So now clearly there's an element of what is called political theology in this text, right? So I try
Yeah.
to uncover that there's a political theology to AI, and it is hidden, and it pretends to be secular, right? It pretends to be
Yeah.
non-religious, right? And so I try to expose this and show that no, there's a lot of mythology that is built into legitimating AI technology and making it acceptable. So and as you pointed out, I do trace I use Foucault's Confessions of the Flesh, but also Foucault's hermeneutics of the subject was very useful in writing about this text, because in the hermeneutics he talks more about the Greek aphrodisia as well, and he really
Yeah.
shows how these techniques or technologies of the self have evolved throughout antiquity to Christianity. And then he makes some comments here and there about the 16th and 17th century, and then 19th century as well, but he doesn't really dedicate a whole book to those eras. But the point is there is a direct linear continuity, even though I don't trace that continuity in my book, but there is a historical continuity of the techniques of the self that can be traced from antiquity to modern sort of digital or spectral subjects, as Stipinska mentions them. Now, you mentioned the transformation of the logos. That's also very important, because logos is the ancient interface, right? Metaphorically, we can say the ancient interface or the ancient apparatus is the logos. And the logos operates as a power structure, I argue, more so in Christianity. So in Christianity, power becomes more dominant than resistance. So at least Foucault's idea, and I am kind of I bought into this idea. I believe this. I like this approach that Foucault has, which is the golden age of what he calls paresia, or the golden age of the courage towards truth, towards speaking the truth, was this ancient period of aphrodisia, the ancient period of Stoicism, and then early Roman period. So the period between Plato and Christianity is what Foucault thinks was the best period to study if we are to think of resistance today, right?
Mhm.
So yes, and then so with Christianity, logos becomes Christ, and Christ becomes an interface. And the problem of Christianity is the problem of the flesh, right? Now, the title does say, right, pastoral technologies of flesh, of cybernetic flesh. So flesh is the target of the apparatus, right? So today, what AI wants to make invisible or disappear or sometimes even destroy quite violently is precisely flesh. Flesh creates a problem even today. And so flesh is the domain of resistance, right? Flesh is where we can think of how can we constitute our flesh differently in a way that is not computable, right? In a way that doesn't fall into this neoliberal cybernetic paradigm of be your own entrepreneur and sell yourself and be predictable. It's all about predictive analytics, of being predictable, of posting regularly on social media, taking selfies regularly on social media. So we see that entire culture, which is now not just capitalistic, but also cybernetic, right? So you have to be profitable and you have to be computable, you have to be predictable. So a Turing machine is supposed to be able to know what you're going to do.
Mhm.
Okay, and this all of this is a confession, right? These are histories of confessions, right? Which you traced very well. And one thing I would add to this only is that today confession has become passive, right? So you don't need to talk to someone to confess. You can talk to a chatbot, right? The chatbot is the new priest. You can always consult the chatbot. But even if you don't talk to the chatbot and you're just browsing media, clicking things online, everything is recorded, right? So these are also kinds of confessions, right? In some way,
Yeah.
they trace your activity. So the confessional becomes automated, right? So we were saying automated confessional. We see robot priests, right, like AIs. And then so now the question. So we are led through this of the foundations, right, of AI. Now, there's one thing I have to confess. which is that I don't know if today AI epistemology is still relying on Turing's model. It's very possible that they've moved beyond, and I have to now do research and find out what the new model is, because I think Wittgenstein did an excellent job of deconstructing the Turing thesis, right? And so maybe I'll talk a little bit more here, because I think what Wittgenstein does is very ingenious. And it's
Mhm.
not very visible in his writing style, because he had a very conservative writing style. He would just write in short sentences, and sometimes he would refuse to explain. He was
Yeah.
very eccentric figure, right? So the first thing Turing says, right, is profound, but not as profound as what he does later, right? So the first thing he says Turing's machines are just people who calculate, right? He says they are just people who calculate. Now that is profound, because what he's showing here, and what the musical composition example shows, is that there are domains of human activity that you just cannot reduce to calculation. Now that's something that I'm further investigating with another book that I'm writing, which is a book on Deleuze and painting. And there Deleuze
Mhm.
talks about painting in a very original way. He offers an ontology of painting, which I think is also incomputable.
Mm.
Um, Also relevant today, because there's these conversations about AI painting, right, and doing all these amazing things, while we have to do all the difficult labor, right? The AI does the interesting stuff, we have to do the boring stuff. Um, and so I'm really interested in these sort of analog forms of human activity that are irreducible to computation. And so Wittgenstein's musical example is one of these, right? So the danger, or what I think is the biopolitical danger of thinking humans in terms of machines who calculate, is what happens is that first it legitimates, or it justifies the building of an infrastructure around humans that forces them to calculate, right? So in a way, if you want to work today, if I want to work today and be a freelance writer, right, online, right, to make some money on the side, right, I have to look at SEO, search engine optimizations. I have to see what words are used very often, right? So I have to really, I have to forego, I have to give up my creative writing to a certain extent, and I have to make my writing computable. Otherwise, they're not going to pay me, right?
Mm.
So there's an infrastructure that is built around me. No one is forcing me to do it, but I sort of need the money. So it looks like I'm doing it out of my own free will, right? So there's this
Yeah.
element of freedom, or artificial freedom. Um, and that sort of I'm forced to enter this infrastructure when I write like a machine. So I write like a machine, but then I finish my work, right? And in my free time, I don't do things like a machine. I do things spontaneously or randomly in a way that's not very predictable. But if I'm forced to calculate all the time, if I'm in a precarious position where I have to write in this way all the time, then it might look like that this is who I am, right? Because if I have to work all the time and this is all I do, then it really
Mhm.
looks like I'm a Turing machine, right? So the biopolitical danger, right, of the epistemic power, right, the epistemic regime here, is that if I can force you to do something repeatedly, and then I say this is your nature, right? Then I have a
Mhm.
very compelling argument for human nature, right? Then I say,
Mm.
look, they're all calculating, right? But what I don't say is that, well, I force them to calculate, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's the danger of the human being becoming a Turing machine, right? So if you think of the human being as a Turing machine, there's a danger that he will, in fact, become the Turing machine, and he will be forced into an interface against her will. Now, that's just the first part of what I think is brilliant with Wittgenstein. But then the
Mhm.
second, more complicated question, right? He says, is calculation, right? Is calculation itself a form of calculation, right? So,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that's a profound question, because Wittgenstein has his own ontology of calculation. He has his own ontology of mathematics, and Turing has his own ontology of mathematics, right? So the first battle, right, is in within the domain of philosophy of mind, right? So Turing says, I have this mathematical model of the human mind, and I will introduce this model. And then Wittgenstein says, well, no, you can't introduce this model, because the human mind has, or the human experience has aspects of it that is irreducible to your model. But then Wittgenstein starts to attack the mathematical domain, right? Then he says, not only is the human mind not structured like a computational model, but even mathematics isn't quite computational. So Wittgenstein
Mhm.
says even mathematics is to a certain extent not computational in the Turing sense, because calculation is a social practice, right? So his argument is not only is the human mind not a Turing machine, but even calculation isn't always Turing computable. So he thinks of calculation as a cultural practice, as a socially accepted cultural practice, right? So that was the second move, and that summarizes um, my take on Wittgenstein and Turing, right? So Turing sees the mind and the act of calculation as abstract, as an isolated, discrete system of units,
Mhm.
um, and then he attempts to reduce all of human activity, or his followers attempts to reduce all of human activity to that kind of system. And Wittgenstein counters first by liberating the mind, and then calculation itself. And one of the fundamental arguments is that there's no such thing as a simple rule, right? This is Wittgenstein's core thesis. There's no such thing as a mechanical rule, because a rule is a complex concept. He says a rule is a complex concept that requires interpretation. So a machine is only able to follow a rule, and it seems like it's a simple rule because it is embedded in a society. So within a society, a machine knows what to do, but it's because there's all these other humans and their lives that are regulating the activities of the machine. So the fact that inside the machine there is a system of perfect rules, that is a mythology, right? So that's the central argument. That is a theological concept. So there's an element of Turing's thesis that is theological in many ways, right? And yes, your final comments on Deleuze, and because here already with Wittgenstein we see an aspect of resistance, right, against computationalism, and Wittgenstein offers the most sophisticated path of resistance because he challenges the formal system at its core, right? And then we have the Deleuzian element, which is this idea of a minority machine, right? So when I was reading Deleuze's Minority Machine, he conceptualized, he and Guattari had a notion of resistance that is more active and more empowering than Kafka alone. Because with Kafka, we have this pessimism, this nihilism, and
Mhm.
so forth. With Deleuze, we have a more active kind of, we can fight back, we can perform lines of flight, right? So so literature, I think, is an important domain of resistance. So in general, art, it seems, right? Throughout the book, we have poetry, we have music, and we have literature. And these are, and painting, now I mentioned painting as well, right? So these are, I think these are important because I don't think we can compute a metaphor, for instance. I don't think we can compute how metaphors work. I don't think we can isolate some element and say this is always how metaphors work, because the whole idea of a metaphor is to break down meaning and in a
Mhm.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so and the Murderbot. Well, I thought the Murderbot was a very interesting character and a very relatable character for several reasons. First of all, because it's fragmented, right? There's a lack inside this robot that is a very human lack, a psychoanalytic type of fragmentation of the subject. But also there was a double metaphor here because it's not only is it fragmented emotionally as a subject, but also physically fragmented as half human flesh, half robot, right? So a literal metaphor there was something that I really like too. And it's very relatable because we are hybrids too, right? We are already hybrids between machine interface and human cognition, right? We are already joint cognitive systems. And so the transition, so the political maneuver here, the ideological maneuver, is that while we are being distracted about apocalypse, AI, utopia, meanwhile, we are already inside the apocalypse and we are already undergoing these changes as hybrid subjects. So we're talking about, oh, singularity will happen, we will become robots, but we are actually already becoming robots just by this interface right now. We are already in the process of becoming robots, and that process is being hidden by these grand eschatological narratives of
Yeah.
apocalypse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, so and finally, I like Martha Wells because she because the problem in her book is not the big evil AI or the big good AI that's going to help
Mhm.
or destroy us. It's us, all right? The AI is almost innocent. The AI is a positive character, but we humans, we are the problem. We have created a situation where both AI subjects and human subjects are suffering, right? So that's why I liked Martha's book.
Okay, okay.
Um, yes, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you again so much. This was wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I wanna to say sincerely thank you. Sorry.
That's it.
So now I wanna say a sincerely thank you to George's contribution to the conversation. And now I wanna give the stage to Professor Chen. It seems that he has a lot of things to talk about you. Okay.
Okay, thank you for Georgie. You spare time to join our reading group. Actually, we have several other students actually inside the room. I can show you around here, and yeah, they're they're very thrilled to be here. And uh, thank you for your book because it brought up something that I have considering for quite a long time about the religions of theology and the technology, which is a big part discussed recently, given the circumstances, the global circumstances, I guess. We have a lot to talk about the alignment of the Silicon Valley with the uh, religious group, with the theology, with Christianity. But your book actually dive into the historical text by rereading Foucault and try to connecting the AI technology and also the relationship between AI technology with Christianity and also the theology. It's actually making the connection between these political climates and also the theological text and also the AI technology itself. So it's sort of a, at least for me, it's a bridging sort of approach where I can connecting the political theology and technology. And also by reading your book, it actually gave me a sense of a synthesis of different traditional theological traditions. You can easily identify the French school, starting with Foucault and Deleuze. And then we witnessed something from the material studies from Hitler or from the German school. And also we can identify the theoretical lineage from the Italian sort of a theory, like the political theology, because recently we are reading Roberto Esposito's book. So it's a very comprehensive approach tackling the relationship between technology and the theology. So that's very actually that's very illustrative, at least for me. And another thing, when I, of course, there's loads of stuff you are talking about in this book, as you mentioned about, and also as the presenter, as you mentioned about, but something actually, as you actually mentioned about, is your separation of clear demarcation between the definition of body and flesh. Because in Chinese translation of these words, we sometimes tend to conflate it. The concepts of the body and flesh is all being translated into the 身体, the body. And especially you give the sort of example through analyzing, through the synthesizing the literature in data quantification. Because a couple of years ago, I wrote a bunch of papers on data quantification, and also I use a lot of the literatures you actually cited, Lupton and other people, marvelous work. And by using the cases of datification or the quantification, you actually illuminate the differences between body and flesh. Body is something reasonable that can be quantified and can be penetrated by data and actually is saturated with data. But the flesh is something that cannot be reduced to mere data. It's uncontrollable, irreducible, and randomly and cannot be compressed. And actually, these kinds of separation is interesting because considering all the body sort of research from Judith Butler and a bunch of other kinds of literature, which have actually tried to deviate it from the idea that the physiology of the body or the flesh is important, because all this dialogue about body is diverted into the social construction of the body stuff, but it's missing out the starting point of the flesh being flesh itself, the natural physiology, nature of this, because it's crucial and especially important in this AI era, because that's something probably still made human being human, because it still bear the heaviness of the flesh. So your separation or your identification of these two different concepts is very crucial for our understanding of the AI's current development. That's something I want to point out, which is very interesting. And also one thing, it's I think that I wonder you probably can elaborate on is, even though your main focusing thing is tracing the development of the Christianity, its theology, and how the AI, the codes and things has been embedded into the whole history of the Christianity, this theology. But there's another very heated debate about the AI, about this current political theology, is about the danger of enlightenment. Because we said about, because the development of AI, as you mentioned about, it destabilizes a reading subject. It destabilizes the idea of people can grasping their own fate or grasping the surrounding environments. And that's coincided with the arguments that the sort of enlightenment actually pushing people, I mean, moving people through the theology era to this kind of reasoning era by re-establishing the individual or the sort of self, re-establish self as a self, and the people can actually be a reasoning subject. And how this development, if you put into the lineage of the development of the theology, development of Christianity, its relationship with the AI, how the enlightenment standing in these kinds of entanglements between technology and theology, and how are you going to be sort of in dialogue with the idea of enlightenment? How will that be affected to that part? Because for last year, I spent my time in Berlin visiting the Humboldt University. Actually in Berlin, they have a large exhibition on the enlightenment. What is enlightenment? And there are a bunch of, I mean, at the beginning of the exhibition, they show different paintings during that period of time. The most theme, the motive in these kinds of paintings is the lights, enlightening the lights. You have the sunlight, you have the candle lights, different types of lights. It gives the metaphor of sort of brightness, okay? But when we arriving at the AI and arriving at the large language model, the metaphor we're prone to citing is using the metaphor of black, darkness, black box, or there are other people saying this black enlightenment or whatever, the black deluge or whatever. The basic metaphor they're using is so contrasting. So I just very curious, how do you place this enlightenment in your arguments, even though you're not talking about, but it's something I'm very, very curious. How are you going to place the enlightenment inside your long lineage of the kinds of investigation between the relationship between theology and technology?
Thank you so much. That was an excellent commentary. That was really good. I'll make a small comment about flesh first. So you mentioned that in Chinese the body and flesh are used interchangeably. I think that's also the case in English, and that's why I think I had to emphasize so much the separation, because I think in English too it is conflated. People say body of Christ, the flesh of Christ. They use both terms. So yeah, that separation was very important, and I owe most of that, I think, to Merleau-Ponty, because Merleau-Ponty I guess it takes the Christian idea of flesh. I don't know if in French how it is in French, but he makes flesh into this positive force of resistance. And Merleau-Ponty has written a lot about the biological body versus the phenomenological body, right? So Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology is all about deconstructing the biological body and showing that the biological body, the empirical body, as useful as it is a complex construct. So there are certain experiential intensities underneath the organic body that are neglected, right, by modern empiricism. So that's where flesh comes from. And Foucault was a student of Merleau-Ponty, so there's probably some influence there as well. Now, questions of enlightenment. Now, I haven't done my critical research on enlightenment yet, but there is an excellent book, and you asking the question just reminded me about the book. It's called Enlightenment Biopolitics by William Nelson. The subtitle is A History of Race, Eugenics, and the Making of Citizens, right? So in a way, this already answers a lot of what we're trying to pose here. And the question of enlightenment and the question of light, right? I think this question of light is very important. Foucault himself famously said that the light is a danger, right? Stay out of the light, it's a danger, he said. And I think that's the gaze, the Lacanian gaze is also relevant here. The masculine gaze, the racist gaze, all of these various forms of enlightening, right? Or shedding, putting a light on the subject, right? Which also reminds me, okay, all these concepts are now flooding in. There's also the Deleuzean idea in Deleuze's reading of Foucault in his lectures, he has this idea of visibility, right? So he says, with Foucault, we have epistemic regimes, right? And with every epistemic regime, there's a kind of panopticon that deploys visibilities of how things are to be seen, how they're supposed to be interpreted and understood, right? So indeed, this counter movement of blackness, of darkness, of dark Deleuze, dark enlightenment, this is very important. I think these are very effective tools of countering this pseudo-secular making of citizens that has emerged out of enlightenment. So absolutely, yeah, definitely.
And also another thing I want to pick up on your previous presentation about the sort of man machine combination or assemblage or whatever, and there's a connotation that this invasion of perfect sort of a pure human body or being human by the invasion of the technology of the AI or of the mechanism, whatever, is in erosion of the self. I don't know. My impression is in Donna Haraway's Cyborg, it seems Donna Haraway is embracing these hybrid entities. Of course, they embrace it under a different sort of a theoretical underpinning, because the Donna Haraway using these cyborg try to advance his feminism theory, but it's all holder an optimistic view of this kind of man machine or this kind of cyborg hybridity. But by reading your book, it gives me a sense that it's the erosion of the self by the AI is something that's problematic. And my thinking is that is there a possibility that if we following the Darwin's evolution or something, is there a possibility that the human beings is keep evolving, as mentioned about in the Kathleen Hayes book, that it had to evolve, it's evolved into something that it combined with algorithm or combined with robotic? And is this a possibility that the man and the machine, this kind of assemblage, or this kind of hybridity, it's the arrow of evolution. That it's a part of the evolution as a human being, as Darwin, as mentioned in its theory. So it's just something I just coming up when you mentioned about the sort of evolution and also cyborg in that part. Especially you mentioned about the part in the System Red book as a novel. Yeah, that's another thing I wanted just to point it out.
Mhm. Yeah,
I don't.
absolutely, absolutely. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, there's the idea that our merging with technological artifacts is the next stage of human evolution. That's perfectly fine and acceptable. I don't see a particular problem with that. Also, I don't really believe in this pure body as well, right? This self that is untainted by technological artifacts. I don't believe in that at all. In fact, the line of resistance that I'm offering is actually more like a Stoic or a Greek aphrodisia style assimilation of technology, as opposed to a Christian kind of assimilation of technology where we are completely obedient, right? So the idea is to choose and be aware of what relations of power you enter into with interfaces, and not just some sort of AI asceticism where you just say no to all technology. That's just not possible today, I think. So my conception of flesh is not that of a pure self untainted by technological artifacts, but it's more of a rhizome, right? A Deleuzian rhizome that enters into certain relationships with technology. It's just not the relationships that maybe mainstream culture or the technological or the political trend wants us to enter into, right? And I think one additional comment I can make about this, just to make the point clear, is I want to think of Colin Koopman as is also a scholar of Michel Foucault. He has written a book called Informational Persons. And in that book, he has done a very interesting thing. I mean, he does a similar thing. He traces the genealogy of how we became informational persons, right? He doesn't have a focus on AI specifically, but he does something very similar. He takes the idea of Foucault's political technologies of the self, and he shows how they have merged with digital apparatuses. Now, an interesting thing that he says is that we were informational persons even before computers. So we didn't really need computers to become informational cybernetic subject. Is that it's just that the computers are the most powerful artifact within this paradigm, but it's just one artifact within the present paradigm. And then he says, if you take the idea of identification or analog birth certificate, right? If you take your passport, birth certificate, these are also artifacts that make you into a computable person, right? So I don't advocate for any kind of nostalgia where we go back to a pre-technological age or some utopian ideas like that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's your clarification about the flash is something, yeah, that's very illuminating. It's something that is the flash you're conceptualizing is keep deteriorization, is keep a reason, as you mentioned, the Deleuzian reason, is something against sort of categorization, against sort of pin down, against terrorization. I think that way, actually, you clarify. Yeah, it made me more sort of understand about the concepts. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions and that you want to add it? Yeah. You can using the mic. I can mute it.
So here I have only a question. So, Georgie, some people say that Foucault is more of a historian than a philosopher, and in a way, your book reads like a genealogy of AI, which uncovers the hidden savoir, the knowledge behind the discourse surrounding AI. So, my question is, for a student like me in communications, I want to do something as empirical research, especially meso-empirical research, meaning upon the pastoral technologies of the flesh, as you mentioned. So I would like to ask, where would you suggest we start? For example, like the interesting research subjects or research methods concerning the empirical research, the meso-empirical research upon the pastoral pastoral technologies.
To make sure I understand the question, you're saying where would you suggest one would begin doing empirical research
Yeah, yeah.
on how people are made into computable subjects?
Because the genealogy of AI, this kind of writing is historian is quite different from we communications major do. What we do is empirical research. So my question is how to connect these two things together. Yeah.
Okay, okay, excellent. Yeah. Um, okay. So first, let's talk about Foucault being a historian. You said some people say Foucault is more of a historian than a philosopher. Maybe philosophers say that, but my advice would be go talk to a historian and see what he says. And he will say, no, 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 he's not a historian. He's more of a philosopher. You know, so it's like nobody wants Foucault. He's in a liminal space between philosophy and history, because he's just that subversive, you know, he's just that critical, because he has undermined historiographical research by offering a kind of methodology that is at least as good, right? And he has also compromised classical Enlightenment philosophy in many ways, because he showed how ideas emerge out of a kind of embedded, situated sort of cultural context, right? Okay, so I would give now I don't know what is the formal methodology in communications, but I would love to know. But I think Foucault's advice would start from your immediate surroundings, right? So Foucault would say start from a kind of phenomenology almost of where you are, right? So think of, okay, how does computationalism affect me personally, right? So I, as a writer, would maybe begin by studying those little built-in AI systems in PDFs. Have you encountered one of those? You open a PDF, and then it's like nobody asked you whether you wanted it, whether you like it, whether you there was no question, right? It was just it was probably somewhere in the terms and agreements, but at some point I had a regular PDF, and now I have a little AI assistant underneath, you know. And I haven't really tried it. I'm not very interested, but it would be interesting to do a research on that, you know, like how does that affect your research, right? How does that work as a medium between you and your colleagues when you do research, right? Is that AI useful in that research, or do you use AI to write emails, right? And then how does that impact our relationships with each other? Because my guess is that it reduces the element of honesty, and it increases the element of predictability in human interactions, right? Which is beneficial for maybe administrative apparatuses in universities. It might be beneficial for companies that make money off of data, but it may not be very conducive to human autonomy, right? So these are several ideas or pathways that one could explore.
Yes, I got you. Because yeah, in China, we have kind of so many counterpart of the ChatGPT. Yes, uh, uh, we have DeepSeek, we have something which is similar to ChatGPT, and even AI therapist or AI doctor. So the AI doctor is it is research and launched by a company. It's called Alibaba. Yeah. So yeah, this company launched the AI product, and there's many sort of discourse around this AI product. For example, I have seen like a report on the AI product. The CEO would say that the AI product can act as a kind of AI doctor. You can say something about your disease and upload your images concerning your bodies to the chatbot of the AI product. So I think that's um, quite available research resources for me in China. Okay, so I think um, your response is very illuminating for me.
I just want to add one thing. I think you talked about the doctor AI whatever. It's something that you can connect into the body, flesh, and the sort of a investigation of your body and the neoliberal idea of how to manage your body stuff. So probably this kind of a medical AI, something like that, is something that you mentioned can be an empirical study to investigate the relationship between these sort of the body, flesh, and also the 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 invention of the self and also the evolution of self. Probably that's one good way to actually to look into. And guess what? I just want to add one thing.
That's an excellent note because that also ties in with the idea of visibility and the gaze, because Foucault also has a notion of the medical gaze in his book, The Birth of the Clinic. So I think if you take the birth of the clinic and then you trace the epistemology of how the body is spread upon a geometric or a mathematical plane in the attempt to understand it, well, all you have to do, you already have a ready-made genealogy, you just have to add on top of that the computational paradigm and how the computational paradigm wants to do the similar flattening out of the body or the body's features onto an understandable, comprehensive plane. And yeah, you could do that as well.
Okay, okay, very thank you. So it's about 1 hour and 30 minutes for the reading group. So but how about ending the reading group now? And here, to sum up, I want to express my sincere gratitude for Giorgi Vachnadze's attendance, because actually it was very coincidence for me to to both watch the book and read your book during my winter break. And it was actually Professor Qian who encouraged me to, to make acquaintance with you, to contact with you. So yeah, I want to express my sincere gratitude to Giorgi, to Professor Qian, and to, the silent classmates right in the office. So I hope to to explore the academic question, concerning my own communication studies. And yeah, I hope you do have a good day in Tbilisi.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much one more time, and you have a great day as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, goodbye.
So goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.